But we're back. The Eureka Conservative Daily Bible Read and Bob Rant from me and my boy JJ. We've been offline for a while, so we're back online. Been busy. As I've said, anyone who's followed me this year, for me, work is a bit busy. It's been a bit busy for the last fortnight. So I just haven't been able to get on and do this. I've been flat out with everything else. So unlike a lot of the other podcasters, and I'm by no means getting ahead of myself. I'm only a very small podcaster who gives his opinion. But I don't like the term grifter. I'm not a grifter. I go out there. I have my own business. I work bloody hard to make that business try and work, and with varying degrees of success. The only thing I ever do via this podcast is put the buy me a coffee thing up there. And if someone sees value in what I do, they can buy me a cup of coffee. If they don't have to. And I love my cups of coffee, by the way. So I'm not going to sell you videos, T-shirts, merchandise. I'm not going to sell you a master class, as my friend Topher does. And I do say friend sparingly, about how you should think. I actually just provide my opinion, and hopefully that makes you think about where you stand, and you're entitled to have your opinion. I do not need someone, for example, like Topher Field, Avi Yemeni, or anybody else to telling me how I should think about my politics, my life, or what government should be doing in my life. I'm a big boy. I can make my own decisions, and I can think it through. So, and that means I'm not going to grift. I'm just going to share my thoughts, express my opinion, maybe provoke some thought and discussion amongst others who may follow me or may not follow me, and go from there. So anyway, without any further ado, that's why I've been away. I've been busy working, trying to make a living, to pay rent, pay fuel, do all that sort of stuff that everybody else does out there. So I'm just a nobody who gives an opinion, and we go from there as a conservative. For those who follow me, for those who haven't, the first thing I always do is give you a look at Melbourne weather. So here we go. And today's pretty miserable. It's wet, it's cold, it's a little windy, not too bad, but it's wet. It's been raining a lot this afternoon. It's very cold. I've got a heater on downstairs, a heater on upstairs. So it's not Melbourne at its finest, but we shouldn't be complaining because today's the first day of winter. So it's going to get colder and wetter as we go on. So there's my boy in the background, JJ. And yes, before anyone has a crack, if they notice it, yes, I'm wearing a Maccabi hoodie, which is the Jewish sporting club in Melbourne, because I coach there, and this is beautiful and warm. So if you want to call me, because I do all that, I've said regularly, I have plenty of Jewish friends, I have plenty of Christian friends, I have plenty of friends who are atheists, plenty of friends from across the globe in all different things. So I did coach a Maccabi team. Great young boys who wanted to play really hard, had them for 1 year, got a hoodie out of it, got some pants out of it. They're fantastic, by the way. The hoodie is nice and warm, and got to make some very good friends out of that. But I already had good Jewish friends long before that. And I've had some good Islamic friends, for example. So if you get out enough in good old cosmopolitan Melbourne, you are going to meet people from all different walks of life, which we'll come to in a minute. But before I start, I got to get my that's my left. No, that's my right. Oh my God! So got to get in my settings. It's got me back to front again. Oh, I hate it when it does that. Settings, video. Just give me a ticky, guys. Mirror. I don't know why it automatically switches to the mirror image. Does it all the time. There we go. That's better. That's the real image. So now you can see every day Bible reads. I have not done this since the 19th of May. And before the 19th of May, I had an even bigger break. So I'm going to commit one of my days this week to catching up, because I am committed to read out every daily Bible read out of this book, even though I don't get on daily. But I've got like about 20 days to catch up on. So one of my episodes here is going to be fully committed to reading out these Bible extracts. But for today, because it's been a long time and I've got a bit to say, I'm actually going to get straight to the 1st of June. Oh, and like I said, these are random. I don't know what, but the heading of this one is the benefits of wisdom. So there you go. Proverbs 4:10-19. Benefits of wisdom. Don't we all need that a bit at the moment? These proverbs depict two contrasting ways of life. One is the company of evil people. The other is without people following God's wisdom. Sorry, not without people, with people following God's wisdom. Listen to me, my son. Take seriously what I'm telling you, and you will live a long life. I've taught you wisdom and the right way to live. Nothing will stand in your way if you walk wisely, and you will not stumble when you run. Always remember what you have learnt. Your education is your life. Guard it well. Do not go where evil men go. That's so true. Do not follow the example of the wicked. So true. Just don't do it. Keep away from evil. Refuse it and go on your way. Wicked people cannot sleep unless they have done something wrong. They lie awake unless they have hurt someone. Wickedness and violence are like food and drink to them. The road the righteous travel is like the sunrise, getting brighter and brighter until daylight has come. The road of the wicked, however, is dark as night. They fall but cannot see what they have stumbled over. So true. And so much of it happening in the world right now. It's I'm going to give you a look at Unhinged here in a minute to go through from. In fact, I might do that right now. Just double check that. Just want to double check that everything's working. So give me a chance to do that. And it is beautiful. Let me get back into there. Where am I? Like I said, it's been a few weeks. Here we go. Bring that over there. I want you to have a look. This is a classic example of the left, and I'm doing this to give you a look because I think we've got to start uniting against what's dividing us. And I'll get into that in a bigger way in a minute, but I think we all need to understand what we're fighting against. And have a look at this unhinged nutter. I don't know whether you watch Ben from GB News. I think he's terrific. But he's over in America right now, and he went across to one of these ICE protests where people are protesting it against ICE, and he had to tolerate this arsehole.
Or what?
20 times more likely to commit sexual offences than
the Brits?
Yeah, native Brits.
The Brits that colonized the whole world, you mean? That raped and pillaged the whole world to get the power that they have?
The Brits, yeah.
Yeah, the Brits that did that?
Yeah.
And you guys have the audacity to say that the Afghans and Somalis did what?
Well, it's not audacity, it's just a fact.
So is it not a fact? Is it not a fact that y'all colonized the world through rape, murder, and pillaging? Right or wrong?
That was true, yeah.
All right, then. So what are you talking about?
The British Empire.
So what are you talking about then?
Hey,
how dare you? How dare you?
Why are you shouting?
What are you? Because you're. That's why. How dare you? You're talking facts? Let's talk facts. Let's talk. So do something about it.
Do something about it,
Brit.
My friend.
Do something about it, Brit.
I'm here to ask questions.
How'd you get into this country?
What are you talking about?
I'm here.
How dare you?
Why are you getting so angry?
Really
because you're a piece of you're a liar.
You know you're
a liar. You're a liar.
Would you like me to show you the
You're a liar. Bro, I just asked you. I just asked you what did the Brits do to have the power they have? Answer that question. Answer that question. Answer that question. How did the Brits get their power?
Can you stop spitting in my face? What was the question?
He's speaking.
Why are you shaking? Why are you getting so angry?
Because drone is going. I'm holding everything back not to break your jaw.
Well, you can do it. You would get arrested.
I don't give bro.
You get arrested.
I don't give a.
This doesn't make your argument look. This doesn't make your argument look good. Came out here.
I came out here to talk
for violence.
Yes.
Well, there you go. That's the left. That is the degenerate, violent left. You give facts.
Who started
it? You came all the way over.
Who started it? Who started it?
You give facts, you give data, and they get violent. This is what you see on the streets of Newark last night.
Started, I'm gonna finish it. Started, I'm gonna finish it.
Yeah, I wish you well, my friend.
Started, I'm gonna finish it.
Hey, why don't you go back to your country?
No, I live here at the moment.
Oh, you live here?
I do, yeah.
How'd you get over here? What'd you do?
Aeroplane.
Oh, cool.
Oh my God, you've got to laugh at the left. It's that's the left. One is unhinged and one is a moron. Oh, you can't make this stuff up. That is our left. The dark guy, I mean, he was unhinged. I don't know whether he's on drugs, but he wants to pick a fight over a protest with a guy that wasn't even being remotely violent. Ben, if you watched any of Ben's work on GB News, he's one of the most balanced guys you could ever meet. But there's a guy who wants to break his jaw. So little wonder they have political violence in America, but look at the violence they're having in France right now. Violence is coming to Australia as well. Make no doubt about that. It'll hit our, if it's not on our shores, I shouldn't even say it'll hit our shores. Look at the Bondi massacre, 15 people dead, 45 injured, a country split. Violence is already here on our shores. But the left are like that. If you watch any protest, this is where I give a shout out to Avi Yemeni. I wish he would go back to this. Ever since he went on to Rebel News, he's gone away from it. Where Avi was really good is when they used to have all those BLM protests and all that sort of thing. He would go there with his camera and his microphone and interview them. And we all got to see the nutters that actually are the left. We understand what we're fighting against. And why am I raising that? Because it's people like this that are going to change our country for the worst. And we've got, not in the same manner, but we've got people like these two arseholes that are sitting in our parliaments. Lydia Thorpe, Maureen Farquhar, the little Muslim girl from West Australia. We got a bunch of them that are unhinged that sit in our parliament. So if we don't do something about that, if we don't get some sanity back in our government, the country is in an awful lot of trouble. And we've got until 2028. Now, things are actually travelling all right. It's interesting. The Liberals, for example, they've now got Tony Abbott as the president of the party. They've got two Conservative leaders, I should say the Liberal National Party. You've got Angus Taylor leading the Liberals. You've got Matt Canavan leading the Nationals. You've got Tony Abbott as the president. You've got legitimate Conservative people leading the LNP. It's just a pity they didn't do this 18 months ago. They would be in a far different place in the polls than what they've ever been. But my hope with the Liberals is that One Nation will drag them back to reality. I hope Malcolm Turnbull does them a huge favour and creates this teal party so all the moderates within the Liberal ranks can jump ship. Let them go to the teals and let the Liberals go back to what it was, the LNP, is a truly centre-right Conservative party. That's where its roots were. That's what it was founded upon. That's what it governed upon right up until, the 2000s. Until Howard even after that, right until Abbott got knifed. But then the moderates took over and they've been in charge for a decade. And now all the uni party stuff comes out because the moderates are a mirror image of the ALP. They may as well be in the ALP. There's very little difference. So I'm not one for this uni party thing. I just think politics transitions like everything else in life. Something's popular now is not popular later on. Everyone's jumping on board, and rightly so, the One Nation bandwagon or train. But if we're being honest, and I want One Nation to win, we need a change. We desperately need a change from what we've currently got. So if for no other reason, One Nation is good for that. But I've read the One Nation policy platform. I bet you there's a lot of people out there that haven't, that are still jumping on the bandwagon. And I like their policy platform. It's a Conservative platform that needs support. And if they can put it in place, it will do this country a lot of good. Now, there's the big if. If they can win government, number one, and number two, if they've got the people with the experience and smarts to run government, and that's the other. It's the issue of concern for me. But even with that concern, how do you get experience? By getting in the job. So I've got no issue with them getting in the job. I think Pauline should be a bit careful when she says she won't take people from the Liberal Party. I do love a language where she's quite willing to work with them to get ALP out. But I think I would encourage Pauline and One Nation, if they're in a chance to form a coalition government with the LNP, they should definitely look at it. But they should be, even if they don't, let's say they win government on their own right, if she's going to be smart, I would form what they call a wartime cabinet with the best ministers that she can trust. And Barnaby should be able to help her here from the LNP. So what's a wartime cabinet? Winston Churchill, for example, in World War II, he plucked the best people. Didn't matter whether they were Labor, Liberal, whatever. He just got the best people and put them in his cabinet to get the best results. I think that's what Pauline should do. Because if she wins enough seats to form government, most of her MPs aren't going to have much experience. And if she's smart, she's going to get people with experience, and it would actually embolden her, I think, to sit in the key cabinet positions to make sure her first terms doesn't fall over. Because without people in there that have got experience, and very well could. It's one thing to be critical of governing. Kemi Badenoch in England, who's amazing. She is such a good leader. But she'd been critical of Keir Starmer, and what she said was really good. And she said, it's one thing to be critical of a government. It's a whole different experience to be in government and then be the target of criticism. And if I'm being brutally honest, I'm going to pump up One Nation's ties, but I'm also going to air concerns. I mean, I've got concerns with the candidate they had in South Australia. He said he was part of the, the Reason Party? The Reason Party. He said he was, an avid Kevin Rudd supporter, was all on board with the K-Rudd, climate change, global warming. You've only got to go back, listen to his speech. He's gay and he's got a Muslim boyfriend, each to their own on that. I don't really care. But some of the other stuff bothers me with the party. It was the Reason Party, it was the ALP, and there was another one, all left-leaning parties. And he's bringing up left-leaning issues. So that to me is a concern. And now they've got the guy that won the Faro by-election saying he's going to have all three flags in his office. Well, hold on. I thought One Nation was about one flag. So that concerns me a little bit moving forward. I hope they've got a bunch of other people lined up. I think Corey Bernardi's been a great pickup. I think Barnaby's been a great pickup. And hopefully these people can help guide and help Pauline in this challenge, because it's a massive challenge. Even for Pauline, she's killing it in the polls. But there's 2 years to go. There's 2 years. A week is an eternity in politics. You've only got to look at the Liberals when they came back to Parliament in January and they helped pass those hate speech laws. The floor crashed out on them. And Susan Ley was gone, and now they're in the mess they're in. Had they come back from that and insisted that there would be no hate speech laws and the Royal Commission had to look into radical Islam as opposed to anti-Semitism, I think the Liberals and LNP would be in a far different position than what they were now. They needed to stand up for independence, for liberty, for freedom of speech. And those hate speech laws went totally against that. And people were carrying on about how they got all the politicians back in Parliament. I don't think any of us care that they went back into Parliament. So they should on the wages they get. So anyway, so things are tracking well. There's a few maybe bumps in the road going forward. But if it keeps going the way it is, I would be very worried. The ALP had a big smirk on their face because they thought the One Nation was just going to destroy the Liberal vote. Well, they're getting the Liberals are starting to come back up, the old J curve. They've bottomed out and they're coming back up a little bit. Not a lot. They can't be celebrating. They've got so much work to do. But I think they're tracking in the right way to maybe get some respectability back, to save the furniture, as they say. I don't think they can win the next election. I think they've got zero chance. I think the only one who can get rid of the ALP is One Nation. If Albo keeps governing the way he is, One Nation could nearly do it by themselves, I reckon. But if they need LNP seats, well, they've got to start talking about that sooner rather than later. So I just hope they've got some really good candidates in mind that could run a government. That's where they've got to focus on. So, for example, in Victoria, I have concerns. I've been trying to get on to Bianca, the head of One Nation Victoria. No responses at the moment. Warren Pickering expressed an interest on coming on my podcast just to discuss, who is One Nation in Victoria? Who are their candidates? All the hubbub about their candidate down in Flinders, he wasn't an inspiring guy. So I hope they've got much better candidates lined up for the Victorian state election. We won't know until it comes in, but I do think One Nation will poll well because everyone's looking for a change. Everyone wants ALP out. We're sick of also the Liberals. We don't trust them anymore. So that we're willing all to give One Nation a go. But if it all falls over and they don't get the good enough candidates in, people will move on from them as well. And at that point, where do we move to? We've got nothing. I think that point we're in a bit of trouble. So there's so much to play out over the next year to 2 years. It's going to be an interesting watch, if nothing else. And I desperately hope One Nation is successful because this country needs one nation to be successful. So there is a problem on the horizon, though, that I can see, and that is the centre right in itself. So unless you've been under a rock on, unless you've been under a rock on X lately, there's been this big debate about what is an Australian between ethnic nationalists and civic nationalists. So there's a lot of people I respect on both sides. I mentioned one, Avi. Avi probably wouldn't believe this because I've been a bit critical of him lately, but I actually hold him in high regard. I hold real Rukshan in high regard. They did an awful lot during COVID. They did an awful lot before that. They've got big followings. I think their heart's in the right place. For example, I don't agree with this stupid political party stunt, but I think their heart's in the right place in doing it. I just think it's stupid. I think we should be focusing on policy. We should be focusing on getting enough votes. Oh, excuse me, I got the hiccups. To get the ALP out. And we should be focusing on how we can get a competent government in. My concerns for Pauline federally and having a competent people as candidates, multiply that by 100 with One Nation in Victoria. Who the hell is going to lead One Nation? Do we even know? We're in June now. That means we've got less than the November 11, 5 months. 5 months. That's going to go like that. And we'll be in a state election, and we don't know anything about One Nation in Victoria pretty much. We know Pauline will come down. We know Avi. And Avi, take this the right way, mate. I think you being on those press conferences, being to protect her, Pauline, I don't think that works. I think that'll turn off a lot of people who are still wondering where to put their vote. I think Pauline and her One Nation candidates and people down here have got to stand on their own 2 feet. They don't need you being protected. Let the media come at them. Pauline's doing a great job of batting them off, as is Barnaby. So let them do their job and stop jumping on their coattails, because that's what's going on. And before you get all offended by that, there's too many what we call grifters that are jumping on the One Nation bandwagon. There's you, there's Monica Smith, there's Topher Field. I mean, Topher didn't even want to have a bar of One Nation not long ago. He was the Libertarian of the Year. Now he's interviewing him and getting up there. He's not a conservative. He's a libertarian, for God's sakes. But, anything, and for those who don't know what a grifter is, and I don't know whether Avi's a grifter, that's probably a bit unfair. Topher Field definitely is. Monica Schmidt definitely is. Rukshan's not. I'll get on to Rukshan in a minute. But you've got your grifters out there, and a grifter is a person, if they can jump on somebody else's barrow and get extra clicks and followers. Topher said it today. This Topher thinks he can change the world if he gets a big follower. He's going all around the globe. And you know what? Good on him. He's having a crack. I would encourage everybody to have a crack. And he's going to go and, like you said, he's going to roll the dice, the biggest gamble in his life. I wish him well. I hope it's successful. But I don't like the fact that the grift happens. And we get plenty of grift at the moment. In fact, I think it'll do Topher a lot of good to get out of Australia, to get a bit more of a worldview, and maybe then come back and he might be a bit more balanced. If Topher wants respect, and there is parts of Topher Field's platform I respect. I think he has some solid views on a lot of subjects. I don't think he's good with the political strategy side of things. Just don't. I think if he just focused on policy, he could be quite productive. But he doesn't want to do that because Topher sees himself as a kingmaker. So anyway, but he'll jump on whatever bandwagon looks like it's winning and grifting and all this sort of thing. And the other part is Topher also is against a lot of One Nation policy. He's big on immigration. One Nation is to reduce immigration. So there's a lot of things there. And if you look at Topher's libertarian, and I've got no problem. Be a libertarian. Don't jump on a conservative's coattails, though. You can comment on it, have an opinion on it, but, he was at the after party in Farrer and he's got interviews all of a sudden left, right and centre with One Nation. Well, where were you these last 3-4 years? So, and the same goes with Avi. Avi's jumping on it a bit. So, and like I said, I just don't think it's a good look with him being at those press conferences, battling away. And that'll become bigger and bolder the closer we get to an election. And I know Avi thinks he's popular. I can tell him now he's not as popular as he thinks. And, I'm not chasing any popularity or anything like that. I'm not popular. I'm a boomer or a conservative. I've been the conservative for, I don't know, 6 years or whatever it is. So, and I took on that label despite people saying, oh, you can't do that. People hate conservatives, but that's who I am. It's never going to change. It's who I am. So for me, One Nation coming up the polls, a true conservative party, really, that's all I've been after for ever since Abbott got knifed. A conservative party that can win government. And I've always said, I don't care where that comes from, as long as it materialises, I'll get right behind it. So I'm loving what is happening with One Nation at the moment. So, and I'll do what I can to support them to get them up. And hopefully by supporting them, that'll change the makeup of the Liberals and we'll get them back to what they were. But, sorry, I'm being a bit long-winded here. Here is the concern I have. I'm going back to ethnic nationalism versus civic nationalism. So you've got, on one side, you've got Avi and Rukshan. On another side, you've got people like Scott Challen and Sam Bamford. Now, I have a respect for all of them, but they are all taking pot shots at each other over this nationalism argument, what it is to be an Australian. And with the greatest respect to all of you, I think you're being silly. I think you're diverting the focus from where it should be, and that should be on Albo and the ALP and how many people they're bringing in from the third world, especially from Islamic countries, who have got no, compatibility with Australian values. Someone asked me a good question today. What does that mean, Australian values? Well, it's on my website. Go to theconservative.com.au, look under politics and policy, and I'll put it there rather than going through here. It'll take me forever. But basically, I think Australian values were forged through the Boer War, our federation in 1901, and the Anzacs at Gallipoli. And they passed that baton, that inheritance baton, onto all of us. And what did that include? It included things such as Christianity. It included things such as mateship. It included things such as sacrifice, succeeding when, despite being small. That was one of the great things, the Aussie battler taking on the world and winning, whether that's in the Olympics or that's in a World Cup. The Albanese government has just put a disincentive on that Aussie battler starting their own business and being successful across the globe. With their increased taxes on negative gearing and capital gains. So they're not trying to encourage that. They're trying to discourage that. And even sending our brightest and smartest, our most innovative overseas. Because why would you start something up here? If I was younger, if I was, I'm in my 60s. If I was in my 30s, I would be seriously looking to move. If I was going to establish a business, a startup, I would be doing it overseas. Why would I want to start up a business in Australia when potentially when I want to sell that business, the government's going to take close to 50% of the value of my business for them to spend on all their little stupid projects? I can go to other countries where I keep 100% of the money I've earned as profits when I make that sale. Why would I stay here? Now, at 60, I want to fight for my country. I don't really have the desire to be obviously moving on that, but if I was younger, I'll consider it. So getting back to this, what is an Australian? Scott Challen, Sam Bamford, I don't agree with them on everything. I do agree with them on a fair bit. I don't agree with Avi on everything, though I do agree with him a fair bit. I don't agree with Rukshan on everything. I agree with him on a fair bit. And what I do see is there's this one big issue in the middle that is dividing them, despite all four of them would be agreeing on a massive amount of other issues, and all four of them have a common enemy in the ALP government, Albo and his Marxists, because that's what they are. That should unite all of us, but instead we're getting split by this, again, I'll say, silly debate about ethnic nationalism or ethno-nationalism versus civic nationalism. And here is the two parts. I think there's been accusations of Scott and Sam being Nazis. I don't think they're Nazis. I could be wrong on that. Nazis can be very smart and hide. The NSN guys never want to say they're a Nazi. I'm a groiper. Most groipers have, and Dr. Joe's husband, James, I thought he said it pretty well you walk pretty much a tightrope between being not being a Nazi and a Nazi once you get to that groiper tongue. You're pretty much against anybody who's not white. Now, they'll all come at me, but I listened to that interview that Sam had with Dr. Joe and her husband pretty carefully. And according to Sam, you're not an Australian if you're not white, Anglo-Celtic, or you're Indigenous, if you can't trace it back. So that's pretty clear cut. So if you were coming from Indonesia, you're not Australian. If you're coming from India, you're not Australian. Dr. Joe, for example, has Indian background. So according to Sam, she's not an Aussie. She's an Indian Aussie. And I hate hyphenated classifications of any Australian. If you're in this country, and you want to live in this country and be a citizen, you've got to be Australian. I had a kid I coached years ago. This is going back into the 90s. And he was of Russian descent. I think he was actually born in Russia. And we had a game in Albert Park, the old Albert Park basketball centre. And he came in. This is an open age team. He's a young guy. A tall kid. He could play a bit too. He had the Russian accent. And he came into that game on our uniform, in our club uniform, and he'd sewn the Russian flag onto his uniform. So I said, mate, you're living in Australia. He goes, so? I was born in Russia. I said, couldn't give two shits. You're in Australia. That flag comes off or you don't take the court. And we had a big, massive hoo-ha. I said, no, you can wear a flag on your jersey, but it's not a Russian flag. It's got to be an Australian flag. Now, I didn't call that kid a Russian Australian. I called him Australian. He was living here. He came over here when he was 2. He lived here. He went to school here. His parents were enjoying all the benefits of being in Australia. Australia in the 90s was magnificent. And here he was promoting another country. And I thought, no, screw that. So in my book, if you're going to live here, if you're going to enjoy the benefits of our country, our freedoms, our democracy, everything we've got, embrace our way of life and become Australian. None of this Indian Australian bullshit. None of this Russian Australian. None of this Greek Australian. Italian. You're Aussie or fuck off. Pardon my French. That's it. Now, I don't give a rat's ass on your ethnicity or your DNA or your color of your skin. If you love the country as much as I love my country, if you would fight for this country against any other nation, if you would start a business, employ other Aussies, pay your taxes, do all the right things, then in my book, you're an Aussie. And I can trace my family tree right back to the early 1800s. I've got to talk to my sister. She does all of this stuff. But I've looked at the latest tree we've got. It goes right back to the early 1800s. I think my great-great-great-great-grandmother, she was born in 1820 in Fitzroy. I think it was Fitzroy. So that means for her to be born in 1820, her parents were here. So if her parents go back, we're not far away from when Melbourne was first founded, right? And we're also not far off the first fleet settlement. So I don't know how far we go back, but we go back a long way. On my dad's side, I don't know. We don't have any details on dad's side, which says a bit, I think, about that side of the family. But we're trying to find out. But, dad's, there would be a fair bit, I think, going back. Dad's got the name Man. His parents had 11 kids. Dad's parents died young. So he had to look after the kids, get them out of the orphanages and all this during World War II. While he was fighting in New Guinea, him and Mum used to go around to the orphanages and take Dad's brothers and sisters to the zoo and the footy and films. So Dad went and had 10 of us as kids. So we were good Catholics. And while he was fighting a war in New Guinea against the Japanese, I'll come to that in a minute, he was coming back, and Mum and Dad, before they were married, were picking up all Dad's brothers and sisters and taking them everywhere. So they're a good Catholic family. They're all born in Australia. So my guess is Dad's family has long roots back in Australia. What I do know, on my grandfather's side, from Mum's side, the great-grandfather came from Wessex in England. So I've got both British ancestry, and if you want to call it, I've got Australian ancestry going nearly right back to not long, if not right to the First Fleet. So, my family goes back a fair way. The reason I'm raising that is, as a person with long traces of history, of ethnicity, going right back to not just the founding of this nation in 1901, but the discovery, the building and all this nation right through the 1800s, the whole history of Australia. Australia is a very young nation. You don't have to go far back for our founding fathers, for them to be in your line of heritage going forward. So I just find this whole ethnicity thing just a bit silly, and I'll tell you why it's silly. And Sam triggered this, and I think Sam's and Scott's, and I'd love to get both of them on the podcast to just talk about it. I think their intent is genuine. I don't find anything nefarious about their intent. Okay, I think they're genuine Aussie guys. I think they have a love for their country. They want to see this country prosper. They want to see our next generation prosper. But there's a big battle going on between Sam and Scott and Yavi and Rukshan and all their supporters on both sides. And I can see the good and bad in both arguments. And I'm finding myself traveling this middle ground because I have a different perspective on both of them. All right. So against Scott and Sam's thing, I don't think it's smart to be calling about ethno-nationalism because we'll lose that battle. We'll lose it. There's no way we're going to win that battle. And that gives me a lot of fear. And I'll tell you why we'll lose it in a minute. That gives me a lot of fear that the ALP will get back in 28 because we'll split the centre right. And Hanson still has to have everything go right for 2 years. That's a bloody long time. And the one thing she can't get tainted with is anything to do with this ethno-nationalist debate or the Nazi debate. Now, she's appeared on Sam's show, which is great, but if she got into a similar debate that what Sam got into with Dr. Joe and her husband, the media will have a field day. In fact, I'm surprised the media hasn't actually been on Sam's case, but maybe they don't see him as the bigger threat as they should see, all right, or even with Scott. But, sorry, this is long-winded, but it's a difficult discussion. On the other side, you've got Avi, and the one that really annoyed me was Monica Schmidt. She just, I'll be honest, she gets under my skin a fair bit. And I've invited everybody that I'm talking about onto my podcast several times. The only one to come on is Scott, and we had a great discussion. I think Scott will back that up. I would love to get Avi, Rukshan, even Monica. Well, man, I don't think Monica likes me at all, which is fair enough. I've been critical of her quite a bit. But she made a really bad comment where she basically wiped out the history of the early settlers, the founders. So from 1901, all the Anzacs, she basically said it's the recent immigrants post-World War II, and the only ones who can claim any ethnicity are the Indigenous. Well, I call bullshit on that. So with what Sam and Scott are saying, you know, I can trace my ethnicity, if I want to use that term, I'll come to a different term in a minute, right back to nearly the First Fleet. Is she saying that doesn't count to the makeup of this country? Is she saying all those people that in the 1800s, you know, who established towns, who established cities, who mapped out Australia, who claimed different parts of Australia, because Australia wasn't just claimed on when the British landed on Botany Bay. You know, John Batman, you know, claimed Melbourne and built that up to be Victoria. Others claimed others, you know, like South Australia, West Australia. It came together over time. And they were hard days. You know, you had to come across from the other side of the globe, leave your family and friend behind. You had a totally different environment, totally different landscape, totally different, you know, animal species you're dealing with. And you're trying to establish farms and houses and businesses, and you're building from nothing. You're building from everything that's you can discover in this country. You know, some of it would get imported, but you got to import it all the way from England, you know, and maybe some Europe countries, but it was all done here. So hard times. And a lot of these people, you know, they were, the ones who were convicts, they had to go through and finish their sentences, get their freedom, and then become free citizens alongside the free settlers. So it was an entirely tough life. And, you know, they had to fight like the Eureka stockade, Eureka conservative. They had to fight for their freedoms and their rights against the English Empire. And they paid a price for that. But they won that fight ultimately. And then democracy flourished. And then we got our federation. And then from that federation, you know, a nation grew out of the battles we fought in the Boer War, in Anzacs at Gallipoli, on the Western Front, which a lot of people don't know about, a lot of it in the Middle East, where the Australians led the charge to go through, you know, what is now Israel into Damascus to defeat the Ottoman Empire. That was an amazing military feat by the Anzacs. Talk about small guys against bigger guys. I mean, they were part of a British army, but what they did in World War I on the Western Front and in the Middle East was amazing military achievements. And then that went on in World War II, even in Vietnam. Read up on all of them, some of the battles in Korea. And that decided our values. That decided the ethic of the fair go, of mateship, of standing beside each other, even in the worst of times. Looking after the little guy. Because that's what they had to do to survive. They had to survive the Depression. They had to survive 2 world wars. The sons of those people that went to those wars had to survive Korea and Vietnam. And then in the 70s, things started to change. That's what built this country. And to just wipe that out, and I think this is what people on the RV Rookshine side don't appreciate. If you're like me, I had a father, like I said, he fought in New Guinea. And this is where I get a bit pissed off with all the people who use the Japanese scenario. I'm not old-fashioned. I'm not old school. But I'm close enough to the generations that fought in World War II to understand their hatred for the Japanese. If you read up on any of the history in World War II, my dad fought in New Guinea. A lot of his colleagues who were captured in New Guinea by the Japanese. They were slaughtered. They were used as bayonet practice alive, tied to a tree, and the Japanese just used them as bayonet practice until they died, and then continued using them in bayonet practice. Look at the way they treated all the Australians that were captive after the fall of Singapore, and how many of them died in the Japanese camps. So while you might want to use Japan, and this is where Dr. Joe's husband, James, is 100% right, is if you want to use Japan as your example, just realize a couple of things. Japan has been going for 2,000, its history is for over 2,300 years. They are a ruthless people. Everyone talks about the last 80 years. You don't change your ethnicity and attitude in 80 years. They still have that in their DNA. It's why they are the way they are. And look, there's a lot of arguments to justify that. But Australia is a totally different concept. We go back 238 years. That's it. And we're still a young nation finding its way. So I just hate this divide between the two. So on Scott's side and all that, I'm not with all this purity of Anglo-Celtic. And look, if you know your English history, to be actually saying Anglo-Celtic, I was watching a episode yesterday on Robert the Bruce, the King of Scotland. And the Scots and Irish and Welsh used to hate the English. The English fought several wars to bring that kingdom together. The English were the Normans who invaded England in 1066. So, I mean, the whole English history is a melting pot of Danes, of the Germans, Scottish, Welsh, Irish, Gaelic, a whole melting pot. The Romans, the Celts, I mean, you name it. It's a big melting pot. So even if you want to use ethnicity there, it depends on where you started at. There's a whole melting pot of different DNA, of different ethnicity. And if you put the Romans into it, well, you don't forget the Romans also fought the battle against the the Goths and all the wild tribes that came from the west, Genghis Khan and his mob. So there's a whole bunch of different lines right throughout human history. Japan and China, they were able to keep their ethnicity simply because to the west, they weren't really discovered until a long time later in history. And because of their populations and the way their military were, people are going to really hate what I'm about to say. But the Japanese and the Chinese and the Koreans, they were far more advanced technology-wise than the Aborigines here. So if any Western nation tried to invade China, the Chinese would have fought back in a big way. Same thing with Japan. They could have held their own easily. I mean, Genghis Khan, the Mongolians, conquered most of Europe. So, and then you had obviously the Islamic Empire starting to build as well. So there was a lot of empires back in those days that could have held their own, and the Japanese and Chinese in particular on the other side of the world. So it wasn't that easy to get there. And imagine having to try and take a whole army across to try and defeat them. It wasn't going to happen. So they had natural geographical boundaries that helped them maintain their ethnicity over that 2,300 years. So to compare that to how Australia was established and then grew and the way it's sort of flourished with different ethnicities is, to my book, again, a little silly. So we can make, and Sam Bamford started this argument, or started this way of thinking for me when he said his mum didn't come across to Australia until after the war. And I'm thinking, hold on, you're talking about Anglo-Celtic thing. Now, if his mum came from Italy after the war, he would be saying that she's Italian-Australian because she wasn't here pre-World War II when all our heritage was established and our founding fathers and all that. His dad was, but not his mum. Well, both my parents go right back. So that means I have got more ethnicity, Australian ethnicity, than he does. I don't know Scott's background. I'm just going based on the conversation that Sam had. Now, I respect that, you know. I'll get back to I respect it in a minute. But I go further back. So is Sam's mum then a British Australian? I mean, if you're going to make that argument about people coming from India or, let's say, Italians and Greeks that came from Europe after World War II, they were known as Greek Australians, Italian Australians, which I hate. They're Aussies. But does that mean anyone coming from Britain is British Australian too? And if not, why not? So Sam's ethnicity doesn't trace right back. At least 50% of it on his dad's side he does. On his mum's side he doesn't. So I'm just wondering, you know, asking questions they ask. So that's where it gets silly. But to me, Sam Bamford is as Aussie as you can get. He wore our military's uniform. He wore our flag on his shoulder. He went to a theatre of war where his life was at risk. I respect his service, honour his service. I respect what he's trying to do to fight for this country and its heritage, which is brilliant. What I do disrespect is where people try to write off that heritage. And that's on the Avi and Rukshan side. And I think for Avi and Rukshan, they'll either hear this message or they won't. I've already put this in a tweet to Rukshan. I've pleaded with him. I've said, in a debate, you can't win. I don't think Sam and Scott can win this debate. I don't think Avi Yemeni or Rukshan can win this debate because they're both on the centre right. They're fighting each other. And the reason they lose the debate, if the centre right splits, ALP win, we all lose. It's stupid. That's why we'll lose this debate. But Avi and Rukshan are wrong, and they seem to be lecturing those that have a real tie and a real passion for our founding fathers, our forebears, the people that built this nation. They're trying to lecture us as to what it is to be Australian. I don't need a lecture. I know what it is to be an Aussie. I was born, raised, and bred an Aussie. I've lived in this country my whole life. I've never been overseas. I've never had the desire to be overseas, maybe later in life. I like reading about overseas stuff, but I love Australia. Australia is my homeland. I've had family who fought for Australia. Thankfully, no one's died for Australia, but they put their lives at risk. I've been fortunate, just for whatever reasons. One, I'm nearly blind in one eye, but if we did go to war, I think they'd ignore that sort of stuff. But I've never had a major war when I was capable of going to a front line and fighting. So, you know, I've never really been needed. If I had been asked, I would have gone. I actually tried to join the army about 3 times, but my eyesight in that eye ruined it. As a kid, that's all I ever wanted to do. I just wanted to join the army. I was a real World War II buff. And so, but I don't need to be lectured. I don't need to be lectured by recent immigrants. I will embrace recent immigrants if they embrace this country. But I don't need Rukshan lecturing me what it is to be Australian. I don't need Avi lecturing me on what it is to be Australian. I don't need Monica, who's admitted her parents are recent immigrants from Holland, I think it was. Well, she's one generation Australian. Now, I'm not going to knock her credentials to be Australian, but don't come and lecture me who's got heritage going right back to the turn of the 1800s. And that's where they get it wrong. So on both sides, I see things that are wrong from people that I think have got the right intentions. But why are we splitting ourselves up over this silly argument? To me, it is about whether you're a heritage nationalist. So what do I mean by that? You can have a long bloodline that goes right back to the First Fleet on both sides. you're a heritage Aussie. You believe in everything Australian like I do. You have a love for this country. You'd fight for this country. You embrace its ideals, its values. Someone asked me today again, what are the values? I went over them just quickly before. And you can also be whether you're born here or whether you immigrated here or whether your parents immigrated here or you don't have that thing. If you come into this country and you embrace our culture, our history, our heritage, our way of life, and that doesn't mean you get to lecture others who've been here all the time, for example, then as far as I'm concerned, you're helping to build this heritage. We're only 238 years old. You're helping to build this heritage for future generations. You're a heritage Aussie, and you're respecting the heritage that's been given to you. Now, there's a lot of people in this country, and this is where it divides between left and right pretty much, who admire, respect, and embrace that heritage against those who want to tear it down. The ones who want to tear it down are on the left. They want to tear our society down, our history down, our country down. They want us to be behind three flags. They want to bring mass immigration to people who've got no interest in assimilating into this country or its way of life. And what their goal is, whether it's electoral power or whatever it is, I don't understand it. It is changing the very fabric of a lot of our cities. It will get into the country and the face of our country. And people who've lived in this country all their lives see it. Avi and Rukshan, we see it. And we don't like it. And if you want to actually get pissed off at people because what they see is this overwhelming immigration that is changing the face of this country and its values and what we believe in and what we're going to be on moving forward, which the ALP talks about non-stop. Burke talks about it non-stop, this new Australia. I don't want a new Australia. I was perfectly happy with the Australia I had in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. It's changed ever since. The country that I lived in for the majority of my life was magnificent. It's still a great country, but it's not like it used to be. And I think most Aussies, whether you want to call them ethnic Australians, I'd rather call them heritage Australians, have been there our whole life. This is what is getting Sam fired up. This is what's getting Scott fired up. This is what's getting a lot of them fired up. And if you can't understand that, then don't lecture them. My advice is to listen to them. And I think that I know from my conversation with Scott, for example, they'll give you a fair shake. That's another Aussie value. And I've listened to both Scott and Sam, and while they don't go, especially I think in Sam's case, and I can understand Sam's case, he went over to one of the most intolerant countries you could ever be in Afghanistan. So he would come back with some certainly strong views on that. And he would want to preserve our way of life after what he saw in Afghanistan. I totally get that. But you've got to understand what they're trying to say. But in both their responses to this, Scott and Sam are two men that won't take a backward step. In many ways, so is Avi. I'm not too sure about Rukshan. And Rukshan, if you listen to this, I really do respect your work and what you've done. I consider you an Aussie, mate. But I do think you got to develop, and this is an Aussie thing, toughen up, Charlie, toughen up, princess. You got to develop a thicker skin. I know people say horrible things about you. People say horrible things about white Australians too, believe it or not. You know, we're racist, we're bigots, we don't know what we're doing, we're hillbillies, you know, we're the worst of Australia. All that sort of shit comes our way. And for most of Aussies, it's water off a duck's back. We come from a generation that survived Gallipoli, that survived the Western Front, that pushed back the Japs, that survived the Depression, all that sort of thing. Well, Aussies push back. And I don't think you guys understand this. You're having a crack at two Aussie guys that will push right back hard at you. And when they push back, Aussies from my heritage, they don't fucking well hold back. I'm sorry for swearing. So you can keep this thing going, or you can try and understand them and their concerns and their fears and what they see for their future. I would talk to Scott and Sam and say, listen, I think you've got to change. And I don't think they will. I think they've been pushed into a corner now. And when you push an Aussie into a corner, they're going to get their tails up. And I think they've got their tails up. So, but Aussies can be fair too. And once you've got them there, I would really plead with Scott and Sam to see the benefits. For example, Dr. Joe. Dr. Joe is not only an Australian in my eyes, she should be Australian of the Year. And I'll tell you what, she's saving Australian lives with her push against the abortion industry. amazing woman. She should be the Australian of the Year. I couldn't give a rat's ass about her background or whatever. She's doing more to save young Australian lives and saving the lives of mums who were considering abortions but now are not doing it, because a woman, unless they're really evil, who goes through with an abortion regret it for the rest of their lives. They're killing their child. That realisation comes into the fore later on. So I think people have got to stop judging each other, and here I am judging everyone. And they've got to start understanding each other. I can understand Scott and Sam's side totally. I can understand Avi and Rukshan's side, maybe not as totally as Scott and Sam's, because I am that heritage Aussie. But maybe if we all came together and had a discussion and worked this through, would be right. You know, I think it's a bit unfair to keep tainting Avi, and Avi, listen to this, as this Israeli puppet. But I don't think sometimes Avi helps himself in that thing, because he does push on Australians a fair few of the Israeli issues. And I'm a supporter of Israel. I'm a supporter of the Jewish community. So, as you can see, I got my Maccabi top on. So, but you got to have some understanding between each of them and not lecture them. And Avi, my advice to you, mate, and you can accept or reject it, a lot of your criticism comes across as lecturing. And we'll get it back up. You're going to get a bit of pushback. And in fact, I think you've lost an awful lot of people already. I don't know whether you're even aware of it. I'd be surprised if you're not. You'd be getting a lot of critics. But I also think, Avi, like a good Aussie, you've got a lot of pride. So if you're going to get pushback, you're going to get your back up. So you've got really good people who want to get the ALP out of government. They're all getting their backs up over this stupid ethnicity, what is an Australian civic debate. Surely we can find a middle ground, and I call it heritage Australians. Whether you've been part of that heritage or whether you've come here and you're embracing that heritage and you see the value of that heritage is to make you an Australian, in my book, you're an Aussie. It's not hard. I don't care. I've had some good, when I was younger, when I was living in Bensdale, which had, because of Lake Tyers, you had a big Aboriginal township down there. I got to know a few Indigenous guys, really good guys. No issue with them. A lot of the Indigenous guys hate all this three flag bullshit, welcome to country crap. They understand that we need each other. So, you know, every week, and I've got a junior basketball team right now. I've got these are all Aussie kids, but these are their backgrounds. I've got one Sri Lankan, if you followed me long enough, you know. I've got one Sri Lankan, two Chinese kids. I had two Indonesian kids. I lost one. I've got two Aussie kids. Who else have I got in there? Just trying to make sure I've got everyone. Actually, no, make it three Chinese kids. I did have some Muslim kids a while ago, but they've moved on, gotten older, out there trying to get jobs and make a good, decent living for themselves. They love Australia, by the way. And all those kids get on. If I put them behind a black screen, you couldn't see their faces and you just listen to their voices, you're thinking Aussie. They love their sport. They love their school. They love their mates. They're thinking about careers. They want to be great at basketball. They're the politest kids you've ever met. Too polite, because I need them to win a bit more. Their parents are wonderful. They love the opportunities Australia's given them. They're embracing our way of life. But they have similar concerns. They have similar concerns about misimmigration. They have real concerns about the high crime rate in Australia, and particularly Melbourne. So, you know, a lot of them have come from overseas countries to escape the Islamic stuff. You know, they're Catholics living in predominantly Islamic countries. You don't think about this, but they've come to Australia because it's predominantly or more predominantly Christian. And they think they'll be able to practice their faith without being, you know, having any threats over them. And they're starting to get worried about the growing Islamic communities and the mosque all over the place. So, you know, and I've known some good Muslim. I coached one really nice Muslim guy, fantastic basketball, a good guy, never an issue. I had some time at Richmond with Basher Hooley, great guy, one of the nicest guys at Richmond you'll ever meet. So, you know, whether you like it or not, and I think Pauline corrected herself on this one, there are good Muslims. You've just got to find them. But my big issue with good Muslims, do they stand up against the bad ones, the extremist ones? But anyway, that's another debate for another day. We've got to sort of start coming together. That's my 2 bobs worth on. I'm happy to speak to anybody I've spoken to or anybody else who wants to come on the program, as long as it's a sensible discussion. If you're going to come on and push really stupid points of view And I think we all know what a stupid. If you're going to say to me, well, you got to be white to be an Anglo-Celtic, well, I'm going, I don't really care. To me, that's just a stupid debate. At first and foremost, I'm a Christian. Christ has taught me that we're all made in each other in God's image and taught me to love one another as I've loved you. Christ didn't say, love every white person as I've loved every white person. He was Jewish, for Christ's sakes. So, excuse my blasphemy. So anyway, we got to get back to being united. We got to get back to the centre right cannot be divided. It cannot be divided if it wants to get rid of the left out of government. The left have got too many nutters behind them, and they won't divide. They will stay unified and they will fight. They're in a minority, but they're very good at divide and conquer. If we divide over this, it'll be one of the silliest issues. And if I'm saying it's silly now, look back in 2 years. If this is the issue that divides the centre right, which it could, we're going to be looking back at this debate when the ALP is celebrating it at third term as one of the silliest things we've ever done. So sorry for me to be long-winded about it, but a few things needed to get said. I got that off my chest. I put it on X. I've had all those coming at me ever since. Some agreeing, many agreeing, actually, I should say. A number disagreeing and calling me all sorts of things. But that's all right. What did I say? I'm an Aussie. You come at me like that, I get my back up. I just go back home. I'm very much like Scott and Sam. And like I said, I've had Scott on here. I want to get Scott back on again. I want to discuss a few of these. I'm firm in my views. He's firm in his. I think we share a bunch of views. There's a few that we'll disagree on for sure. That maybe by disagreeing, he might convince me or I might convince him. I'd love to get Sam on. I really would. Dr. Joe, if you're ever listening to this, I'd love to get you on. Harvey, Rukshan, even Monica, even Topher, but he's off touring the world. So anyway, anybody who's got a platform and ideas, prepared to have a sensible debate, you're more than welcome to come on my podcast and have a discussion. That's what I did this podcast for, to discuss sensible centre-right issues and especially conservative ones. But I'm happy to talk to my libertarian friends and anybody else on the centre-right because we've all got one bloody common enemy, and that is Albo and his silly bastards, his silly Marxist bastards that want to tear down one of the best countries that was ever created. And that's what we've all got to have in the foremost of our minds when we engage in these debates. I don't think we've got it there at the moment. But anyway, I'll do what I can to get that focus back there. All right. Talk later, everyone, from me and my boy JJ. Here he comes. From me, God bless you. God bless you. God bless your kids. God bless your grandkids. God bless that flag. God bless your pets. And let's make this country as great as we possibly can. See you, everyone. Bye for now.